everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Fitness Education Series produced by the Australian Fitness Academy. It's like progressive overload for your brain. I'm your host, Tom Rock, and in today's episode, I'm going to talk about drop sets. So, shout out to Simon for this one. He shot this or had this question, and I thought it was a good one to answer. Basically, come from his time at the gym and what he's seen, and there's people doing drop sets and talking about drop sets. So, I think it's a great topic to discuss. If drop sets are good, are they bad? Should I put them in my program? Should I be doing them? How do I incorporate them? We'll cover that one off today. For those of you, we'll start with, I guess, for those of you who don't know, drop set is basically, I would take an exercise to failure. Let's say seated row, for example. I'd pick a weight I can probably do maybe 8 to 10 reps with. On my 10th rep, I'm sort of basing my last rep before failure. Immediately, I would reduce the weight and then reduce it probably around 20, there's no exact, but 20, 25%. So I can probably get another 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 reps out at this lower weight. As soon as I hit failure again, I drop the weight again. And I could do, there's obviously a lot of different protocols out there, but generally around 3 drops in weight is probably the most common. So I'd go to failure, reduce the weight straight away, go to failure again, reduce the weight, go to failure. So that's the idea of a drop set. So basically, as soon as I fatigue at a certain weight, I drop the weight, there's no rest period, drop the weight, and keep going until you get to failure on that sort of third, potentially fourth drop, depending on what you're doing. So that's a drop set. So in terms of incorporating into your exercise, what I've had a bit of a look at, again, I looked up some literature on drop sets, and there's a little bit out there, which is cool. I won't go through study by study. I'll link all the studies I sort of looked at in the description, so you can have a look at them yourself. But there's a couple of articles, one from Brad Schoenfeld, one from Julius Fink and Brad Schoenfeld together, and then there was a couple of meta-analyses which basically look at a range of literature and review them and put them in a bit of analysis. And that was one from Coleman and one from Lena Christians. But rather than talk about individuals, because they actually wrapped up the concepts relatively similar, each one. So they came up with some good takeaways. So rather than go through each single study, I'll sort of just dive into what they found in relation to comparing drop sets to what we'll term straight sets. If I just do my normal sets and reps where I might do 10 reps, rest for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, do my next 10 reps, rest for 2 or 3 minutes, and then do a third set. So my weight stays the same and I have my rest periods in between my sets compared to a drop set. So what they found, I guess, probably an important takeaway to start with is there was no difference in hypertrophy, significant difference. So while there was probably slight differences, they generally found no significant difference in hypertrophy. So both groups saw gains in muscle mass or improvements in muscle mass. So drop sets are an effective way to train, or they can be, and they will give you hypertrophy. So it's not worse than doing straight sets in terms of if we're looking as hypertrophy as an outcome, but we'll discuss sort of other details around pros and cons as we go through. So definitely can get hypertrophy results from straight sets and from drop sets. While there was no significant differences, one of the studies actually found even there was slightly more hypertrophy results in the drop set group. It wasn't significant, so it didn't hit enough value in terms of a statistical analysis to be a significant difference, but there was slightly more hypertrophy in the group that did the drop set. So that's something to consider. So you can get good results off a drop set, and this is comparing one drop set. So you do one set and then drop, 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 and that's it, compared to 3 sets of normal exercise. So you're technically doing one drop set they're talking about versus 3 normal straight sets. So what they did find, though, in terms of probably a negative side of drop sets, is it tends to increase fatigue. So fatigue is a lot bigger. So in terms of recovery, it's because I go from a drop set, I take it to failure, immediately drop, go to failure again, drop it, go to failure again. It's quite a big taxing set. So they showed significant differences in RPEs and things like that, and they made some correlations and suggested potentially drop sets could be more inclined to lead to things like overtraining and things, just because of the higher stress they put on the neuromuscular system. So the fatigue they put on the body is a lot higher than normal straight sets, where I get to recover between each set. A drop set, I guess, is quite an intense set, so causes a lot of fatigue. So that's something they talked about in one of these analysis, is that it may cause overtraining, or not cause overtraining, but it could lead, or it's got a higher chance of leading to overtraining than, say, your normal straight sets where you recover between. So they're quite intense, and they will increase the RPE of a session or of an exercise potentially. The other thing, this one was mentioned in the Julius and Fink and Schoenfeld article, is you potentially get less strength improvement with drop sets. So while you get the same hypertrophy, they sort of thought, they theorized that they showed a little bit less gains in strength, or they tested their 1RM of their participants pre and post. So they saw the straight sets people improve their strength more than the drop sets. There's probably a lot of reason behind that, but obviously the straight sets are doing more sets at a heavier weight, whereas a drop set is only doing one set and the weight gets lighter as they go. So that the stimulus of a heavier weight, they probably don't get as many reps at a heavier weight, so that could lead to that. But if you're looking to build both size and strength, drop sets may not be as good as your normal straight sets with sets, reps, and rest in that sense. So a couple of factors there, I think, to consider. So drop sets can definitely be useful. The other thing that was probably shown that I want to touch on is the time frame. So drop sets, if you're time poor or you're trying to get gym sessions done quickly, drop sets can be useful. What they sort of mentioned is that generally the group that was doing the drop set protocol was finished within half to a third of the time that it took the other group to complete the straight sets workout. So you get the same hypertrophy result, but in a half the time, potentially even a third of the time. So that one drop set can give you the same results as spending twice as long in the gym doing your straight sets. So that's something you consider too. And I think that's, when it comes to programming drop sets, there's not always that everybody needs to use drop sets, or it's not drop sets are no good, you don't need them, just use straight sets. Apply these different principles to where you see fit and where you think they're going to be beneficial for clients. So if a client doesn't have long to train and they want to see hypertrophy results, maybe drop sets are good. But then you want to be able to sort of manage fatigue and workload, because if they're doing drop sets every session, you might find that fatigue and their recovery is impacted. So if they're not recovering, they're not going to be seeing that maximal hypertrophy result either. So recovery is certainly an important thing to consider if you're going to implement drop sets regularly, which may not be a great idea. But if you need to save time, instead of doing 3 sets, do 1 drop set, and you can potentially get the same result. So lots to consider with drop sets. I think if I was looking at implementing them in a program, I think pick your exercises specifically that you would use. So things like your big compound lifts, squats, deadlifts definitely, but like bench press, it could be chin-ups or seated rows, these compound movements, while you can definitely potentially do drop sets with them, especially on a seated row or pin-loaded machine on a seated row, you can. As they're so fatiguing, if I do it with these large muscle groups and full body sort of movements, it's going to really increase that fatigue level and impact my ability to recover, and my neuromuscular system is just going to be absolutely cooked in terms of for the rest of the session if I'm doing any more exercises, but also in the 2 to 3 days afterwards, it's going to take me longer to recover and get ready for my next session. So that's something to consider. So if I was programming them, I'd probably still leave straight sets for my big compound lifts, and if I wanted to save time, if I'm doing exercise like biceps or triceps, maybe lateral raises, it could be leg extensions and hamstrings. Potentially, if you're doing like isolation exercises, again, the quads and the hamstrings are still fairly large muscles, so it will cause a lot of fatigue. But sometimes for the smaller muscle groups, instead of doing 3 sets of bicep curls at the end of my exercise or at the end of my session, I might just do 1 quick drop set of biceps, because then I know I've stimulated muscle growth in my biceps. I don't need to be at the gym for an extra 15 minutes doing biceps. I can get it done in 5 minutes or 3 minutes, I'll do a warm-up set, drop set, bang, biceps done. So I think about how you apply it. I don't think saying drop sets are the best thing in the world, you need to always do drop sets, is a great statement, because again, you might find you're not recovering well, and it could lead to sort of plateau or sort of a decrease if you're not recovering and you sort of hit that overtraining. So potentially look at maybe programming it in every 4 weeks. At the end of your, like the fourth week of your block, that's a tough week, you'll put some drop sets in that week, but all other weeks are straight sets. Or if you're trying to get it in more regularly, stick to just maybe your smaller isolation exercises like biceps, triceps, potentially leg extensions, but again, they're fairly big muscles and we don't want to impact recovery too much. So straight sets are great. You'll get good results from straight sets, and you won't get that massive fatigue factor that you may see for drop sets. But yeah, if you want to save time, really good method. You could half the time you spend in the gym potentially if you implement some drop sets. Again, I would just be careful implementing with larger full body movements, because as we see fatigue, like deadlifts as an example, I wouldn't do them with deadlifts. Because we go so close to fatigue over and over and again, our form is likely to break down, and that's going to increase the risk of injury. So we don't want to increase the risk of injury. These isolation exercises where we can go to failure and we're not compromising form, they're really good exercises to pick for drop sets. But yeah, just take those things in consideration when you're trying to program drop sets into your program. And yeah, see if you like them, see if you don't like them. Absolutely get both good results either way, but they can be a good little tool to think about if you need to save time potentially in your sessions. Anyway, guys, I hope you got a little bit out of that discussion. If you do have any questions you'd like me to cover, or any thoughts on this podcast, please send an email to tom@afa.com.au, and I'm happy to talk about whatever you guys would like to hear me cover. Anyway, have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you all soon.